He told her she was everything he ever wanted, but only when no one else was listening. And when the world turned its eyes toward him, he acted like she'd never existed. Welcome back to the channel. This is a story for anyone who's ever been kept in the shadows by someone who swore you were their light. And if you've ever been denied by someone who said they loved you, stay with us. Let's begin. Mara Elric didn't walk fast, and she didn't walk slow. She moved with intention, in flats that didn't click, holding a bag she'd owned since grad school. On paper, she was the senior financial analyst for Eastvale Corp, one of the most powerful media and tech firms on the East Coast. But in real time, she was a name most people skipped over in meetings. She liked it that way. She wasn't here for the limelight or the company perks. She didn't care about the catered Friday spreads or the rooftop cocktail hours. She wanted stability, a decent job, a predictable life. Her days were filled with risk assessments and projected value charts, not gossip or office politics. The only time that changed was the night Daxon Virel called her name. It was a merger night, one of those long, pressure-filled evenings where half the company stayed late while attorneys argued on Zoom and the boardroom lights buzzed overhead. Mara was seated 3 rows back, updating fiscal flowcharts on her laptop when she noticed a miscalculation. The CFO had reported a 12% gain margin on the Canadian portfolio, but Mara's model showed a clear 8.4%. She checked it 3 times, then raised her hand quietly. The room kept talking, but Daxon heard her. "Say that again?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, but when he turned his full attention to her, the room followed. She explained the discrepancy. Simple, direct. He didn't cut her off. He didn't blink. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "Run your numbers, confirm it. If you're right, we'll correct the statement." She nodded once and went back to work. The next morning, the report released with her corrected figures, and though her name wasn't on it, she knew who'd made sure the change went through. A week later, she was moved up 4 floors. No announcement, no email, just a new access badge and an empty desk directly across from the C-suite wing. She knew what it meant. Quiet promotion, quiet notice. But she didn't expect the attention to become personal, not from him. He didn't start with charm. He started with tea. "Did they get your order wrong again?" Daxon asked one late evening, standing by the hallway beverage station. He held a black mug, sleeves rolled back, no tie, top button undone. Mara looked up from her screen. "It's never hot enough." He paused, glanced at the microwave, then back at her. "Try 33 seconds. It doesn't overheat the cup." She gave a soft nod. "Thanks." It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't a performance. It was precision. He remembered what mattered to her. Small things no one else noticed. Her quiet presence. Her silence in meetings. The way she left at 6:07 p.m. every day to catch the 6:10 red line. A week later, he started staying until 6:15. They didn't talk often, but when they did, it felt anchored. There was a gravity to Daxon Virel that most people misunderstood. The media called him charismatic. The investors called him aggressive. But Mara saw something else, restraint. He could light up a room if he wanted to, but he didn't always want to. They found themselves alone in the stairwell once, when the elevator failed. 5 flights. Neither of them said a word until they reached the top. At the landing, he glanced at her and said, "You're not what I expected." She tilted her head. "What did you expect?" He didn't answer right away. Then, leaning on the marble railing outside the executive floor, he murmured, "I don't think anyone here sees you the way I do." She looked away. He didn't press, but as he reached past her to open the door, his hand brushed her wrist. A touch that lasted 1 second too long to be accidental. She didn't move. She didn't stop it. From that day on, their dynamic shifted. He didn't ask for her time. He claimed it in moments that didn't belong to anyone else. Late Friday debriefs where he'd pull up a chair beside her desk instead of calling a meeting. Saturday mornings where he showed up with almond croissants from a quiet bakery. In Soho, setting one on her desk and saying, "No one knows I'm here." He learned what kind of music she listened to when she worked, what scent she wore, that she liked rain on weekends but hated cold wind on weekdays. He never pushed. He never labeled it. But one night, they found themselves on the rooftop patio above the building's south wing. It was raining softly, and he brought 2 blankets. They didn't sit close, but they watched the skyline together in silence. "I never learned how to rest," he admitted, eyes on the clouds. She didn't respond. He turned to her. "But I find it easier when I'm around you." Mara didn't tell anyone. Not her sister. Not her old roommate. Not even the mirror when she checked her face in the mornings. She kept it all where it began, private, because Daxon never held her hand in the halls, never walked beside her when others were around, never added her name to event lists or private dinners where shareholders brought spouses and mistresses alike. She wasn't naive. She understood appearances. Power came with walls. But sometimes she wondered if she was a wall too, one he leaned on in secret, but never opened the door for in daylight. He always had the same line when she hinted at it. "You know how the world is. Let me protect this. Let me protect you." She nodded every time, until the night came when he didn't protect anything. The 10-year legacy gala at Eastvale was the kind of event that landed in Forbes spreads and financial pages. A full black tie event at the Grand Lucent in Midtown, sponsored by 3 hedge funds and 2 international partners. Every division head was invited. So were their executive assistants. Even the pastry chef from the executive floor got a +1. Mara didn't. She didn't ask. She didn't expect it. But the night before the gala, the CFO's assistant called her in a panic. "He's sick. Food poisoning. We need someone to handle the numbers live." Daxon already approved. "Please say yes." She said yes. But she didn't dress to blend in. She wore a deep green gown, high neckline, satin trim, floor length. Her hair was swept back low. No dramatic makeup, no jewelry, just presence. Daxon saw her the second she entered the hall. He paused mid-sentence, watched her for a moment longer than acceptable, and smiled. It was small, but real. For a breath, she believed maybe everything had changed. Until the actress touched his arm. Mara recognized her from tabloids, someone who'd been linked to 2 other CEOs and 1 international soccer player. The actress leaned into Daxon's side. He didn't flinch, didn't adjust. He placed a casual hand on the small of her back and turned with her toward the flashing cameras. When a reporter asked, "Who's the woman by your side tonight?" Daxon laughed. "I don't date anyone from work. Too messy." Mara was 10 feet away. No one noticed her. But she noticed everything. Her chest didn't burn. Her hands didn't shake. Something much colder took its place. She didn't make a sound. She turned and walked away before dessert. Mara didn't look back. Not when the orchestra swelled. Not when laughter rose behind her. Not when the doors of the Grand Lucent closed with a soft final sound that felt heavier than any slam. Outside, the night air was cool, clean, honest. She stood at the curb for a moment, breathing, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she was steadying herself. What she felt wasn't shock. It was clarity, the kind that arrives quietly and stays. Inside the ballroom, Daxon Varel lifted a glass and smiled for cameras. He delivered a speech about legacy, vision, and growth. Applause followed. Stockholders nodded. The actress laughed at his side, and yet, something was off. He kept glancing toward the doors. Mara took the train home. She changed out of the green dress slowly, folding it with care, hanging it where it wouldn't wrinkle. She washed her face, tied her hair back, sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall. She didn't cry. Crying would have meant surprise or confusion. What she felt was confirmation. Every unanswered question she'd carried had just been answered in public. He hadn't frozen. He hadn't hesitated. He hadn't misspoken. He'd chosen. Monday morning arrived without drama. Mara woke at her usual time, showered, dressed, brewed her coffee the way she liked it. She packed her laptop, but not her notebooks. She already knew she wouldn't need them. At 8:13 a.m., her resignation landed in Daxon's inbox. Subject line, "Notice body, thank you for the opportunity. My final day will be 2 weeks from today." No emotion, no explanation, no invitation to respond. Daxon saw it between meetings. He read it once, then again. Then he stood. "Cancel my next call," he told his assistant. He dialed her number. Straight to voicemail. He sent a message. Nothing. By noon, he was driving to her brownstone. Mara opened the door barefoot. She didn't look surprised to see him. She didn't step aside either. He stood there, jacket still on, tie loosened, eyes sharp with something unfamiliar. "You didn't even talk to me," he said. She held his gaze. Calm. Still. "You talked enough for both of us," she replied. He swallowed. That wasn't what it looked like. She nodded once. It was exactly what it sounded like. He took a step forward. She didn't move back. "You made sure everyone knew I was no one to you," she said. "So let's not pretend now." Silence filled the space between them. He searched her face for anger. Found none. That scared him more. "I was trying to protect." She raised her hand. Not sharply, not defensively. "Please don't finish that sentence." He stopped. "I let you protect your image," she continued. "I let you keep me quiet. I agreed to that because I trusted your intentions. But last night wasn't protection, it was erasure." He looked down. When he looked back up, she was already closing the door. He didn't knock again. 2 weeks passed. Mara wrapped up her work efficiently. Clean handovers, no loose ends, no bitterness. She declined the farewell lunch her team offered, thanked them individually, left early on her final day. No one made a scene. Daxon watched her exit from the glass wall of his office. She didn't turn. The first crack at Eastvale came quietly. An internal memo leaked. A minor one. Nothing explosive, but it shook investor confidence just enough to cause hesitation. Then came the real blow. The actress. The one he'd stood beside. The one he'd laughed with under lights. She'd been feeding private client data to a competitor. It broke in the press late Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, Eastvale stock dipped sharply. Analysts questioned leadership judgment. Headlines circled back to one phrase again and again. Pattern of poor discretion. Daxon stood at a podium and apologized. But apologies sound hollow when the person who once balanced your silence is gone. Mara didn't read the news. She was sitting in a quiet office across town, signing a contract. The firm wasn't flashy. No celebrity board members. No glossy magazine covers. But the numbers were clean. The vision was sharp. They offered her equity. They offered her authority. They offered her daylight. At the press conference a week later, the CEO stood beside her and said, "She's the mind behind Eastvale's quiet brilliance. We're proud to give her the platform she deserves." Cameras clicked. Mara didn't flinch. Daxon watched it live. For the first time, he saw her without shadows. They crossed paths again, months later, at a media roundtable. Neutral ground, neutral topic. She was already seated when he arrived late. Calm, confident, answering a question with measured clarity that drew nods from the room. During the break, he approached. "You look good," he said. She smiled. "I always did. You just preferred to keep it private." He opened his mouth, closed it. "I'm not angry anymore," she continued, "but I am building something you can't undo. That's what your denial taught me." She walked away before he could respond. He didn't follow. This time, he knew better. Mara fell in love again. Not with whispers. Not with late nights hidden behind glass. With someone who stood beside her. Someone who reached for her hand in rooms full of people. Someone who introduced her without hesitation. Someone who spoke her name like it belonged where he was standing. At conferences, he kissed her forehead without checking who was watching. When asked who she was to him, he said, "She's the reason I stopped doubting myself. She's the reason I win." It wasn't loud, but it was real. Years later, Daxon saw her in an airport lounge. She was holding a baby. Her husband leaned down, kissed her temple. She laughed, Unguarded, Daxon sat still. He'd gained billions, built empires, lost nothing on paper. But as he watched her walk away, he understood something no headline had ever taught him. You don't lose people when they leave. You lose them when you deny them. And no amount of wealth buys back the dignity of someone you chose to erase. If this story speaks to you, stay with us. Like the video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories. Mara stood by the window of her apartment, staring out at the city as if it had answers. It was Saturday, gala night. She hadn't been invited, but she knew about it. Everyone did. The 10-year Legacy Gala wasn't just Eastvale's biggest event. It was the kind of night that made headlines, moved stock tickers, and set social media buzzing. Photos would circulate before midnight. Speculation, outfits, speeches. It all built the company's mystique. She had no reason to be there. No one had asked. And until 4:07 p.m., she was fine with that. Then the CFO's assistant called. "I know this is last minute," the woman rushed, voice breathless. "Tomas is out. Food poisoning. Daxon's asked for you to step in tonight, just to manage the data feed during his address. Are you available?" Mara hesitated. It wasn't the work. It wasn't the pressure. It was the implication. She was needed, but only because someone else couldn't show. Still, professionalism was in her blood. "Yes," she said. By 7:43 p.m., she was inside the Grand Lucent. Not through the main doors. She entered from the loading bay, escorted by an Eastvale coordinator, who barely looked at her as he handed her a digital pass. "You'll be positioned at the secondary console near the stage. Quiet spot." "No spotlight," he added, as if it were a favor. She nodded, clutching her slim clutch bag. The green gown moved fluidly around her ankles, catching light in soft waves. She didn't wear heels. She didn't need to. She wasn't there to be seen. At least, that's what she told herself. But Daxon saw her. He was standing with two foreign investors, mid-sentence, champagne in hand. The moment she stepped into view, his eyes found her. And they stayed. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. And for a second, something subtle passed between them. Recognition. Tension. Maybe something like regret. She walked past him without slowing. The hallway felt like glass. The ballroom was a palace. Gilded walls, white florals, gold-tipped candlelight. Every surface shimmered, including the attendees. Mara kept her shoulders back and her head level. She reached the side console, checked the setup. Everything was where it should be. She ran a few silent tests, confirmed the data slide transitions. Then she stood still, invisible, functional. And yet, Daxon kept turning toward her. When she finally moved to retrieve a printed schedule, she heard his voice. Not up close, but not far either. She glanced sideways. He was near the press line, the actress beside him. She'd seen her in magazines before, glossy, scandal-prone, and always holding a new brand ambassador title every 6 months. The woman laughed softly, then slid her arm through his. He let it happen, didn't blink. A reporter angled forward, camera already raised. "Mr. Virel, who's the beautiful woman by your side?" Daxon's grin was casual, familiar, and deliberate. "I don't date anyone from work," he said with a slight shrug. "Too messy." Mara's body stilled. Her hands didn't move, but her heart slowed. The press laughed. Cameras flashed. He didn't look in her direction again. The moment passed like smoke. Thin, quick, toxic. She turned, walked back to the console, and pressed her finger against the screen to begin the pre-roll. Her pulse was steady, her breath even. She finished her task, and left. No one noticed. No one stopped her. By the time she reached the street, the wind had picked up. She didn't hail a ride. She walked 3 blocks to the train, pulled out her pass, and sat in the near-empty car. She didn't check her phone. She didn't replay the moment. There was no need to. It was simple. He chose performance over presence. Again, but this time, she wasn't staying to explain it away. Back at her apartment, she removed her dress slowly, hung it gently, and folded the soft wrap she'd worn around her shoulders. She placed everything in a side closet and locked the door. Not out of bitterness, but because some things no longer belonged in the space she was keeping for herself. The next morning, she woke early. The sun hadn't fully risen. The quiet was deep. She brewed tea, opened her laptop, and began drafting her resignation, not from emotion, not from drama, from clarity. She typed the words in clean font, black on white, reviewed them once, then scheduled the email to send at 8:13 a.m. She had her usual breakfast, no alarms, no tears, just peace and a plan. Across the city, Daxon woke late. The gala had ended with applause, after-parties, and photos he hadn't looked at yet. He hadn't thought much about Mara after she walked away. He'd assumed she'd understood. She always did. But when he stepped into his office and saw the unread email flagged on his screen, something in his chest locked. He clicked. He read. Then he read again. No subject line drama, no bold font, no rant, just, "Thank you for the opportunity. My final day will be 2 weeks from today." He stared at the line for a full minute before hitting reply. His fingers hovered, then moved. "Mara, let's talk before you make any decisions. Come see me?" No response. He called her line. Straight to voicemail. He called again. Same. He stared at the screen, then stood. By early afternoon, he was in his car, driver muted, silence pressing against his chest as he pulled up to her building. She answered the door in a soft grey sweater, no makeup, her hair still slightly damp from a recent shower. He looked at her like he was seeing something important too late. "You didn't even talk to me," he said. She looked directly at him. Calm, grounded. "You talked enough for both of us," she said. He opened his mouth, ready to excuse, to soften, to spin. "It wasn't what? It was exactly what it sounded like," she cut in. "You were clear, deliberate, and I heard you." He took a step forward. She didn't move. "You made sure everyone knew I was no one to you. So let's not pretend now." Her tone wasn't cold. It wasn't cruel. It was clean and final. He dropped his gaze. When he looked up again, the door was already closing. And this time, he let it. Because maybe that was what she'd done for months. Closed the door slowly, quietly, waiting to see if he'd stop it. But he never had. Daxon didn't return to his office right away. He drove through the city without saying a word. His driver didn't ask where they were going, and he didn't offer direction. He just watched the skyline blur through tinted glass. He hadn't realized how quiet Mara's departure would feel. Not dramatic, not messy. Just gone. She didn't demand closure, didn't make a scene, didn't ask for explanation, and maybe that's what made it hurt more. He kept his distance for the rest of the week. He didn't call again, didn't email, didn't ask HR to delay her exit paperwork. She showed up every morning, on time, professional, polished. She cleared her files, sent off clean reports, trained the junior analyst taking over her role. Every interaction was calm and kind. People whispered, of course. Some assumed she had another offer lined up. Others thought she was tired of the pressure. But no one knew the truth, because she never gave it to them, not even him. On her last day, she wore navy slacks and a white blouse. No farewell drinks, no hallway speeches. She typed out her final system log-off, shut the laptop, and placed her badge neatly on her desk. Her inbox had one unread message. From Daxon. Subject, one conversation. She clicked it. Read the body. "If I could go back to that night, I would. I know I let you down publicly after praising you privately. I know what that means. And I know I might have lost the only person who ever stayed with me when I had nothing but a vision. I'm not asking for anything. Just one conversation, no excuses. Just me, you, and the truth." She closed the tab, deleted the message, then stood and walked out. Daxon watched her from his office window. She didn't pause. didn't look up. She moved with the same calm he used to admire. But now, it didn't make him feel safe. It made him feel small, because she had once been the place he turned to when the world got too loud. Now, she was the silence he couldn't reach. Weeks passed. Eastvale's numbers dipped, subtle at first, then noticeable. Internal meetings became tense. Investors started asking harder questions. A few reporters picked up on structural shifts behind the scenes, but Daxon didn't panic. He adjusted. He always did. Until the leak hit. It started with a headline in a second-tier business blog. Eastvale's pretty face, ugly secrets. Attached was a still shot of the woman he'd paraded around at the gala. The same. One who had taken his hand for photos and leaned into his side for interviews. Allegations surfaced of her leaking confidential client data to a rival tech platform. 2 names confirmed. Then 5. Then 11. NDAs were breached. Clients walked. PR scrambled. But the fire was public and growing. By the end of the week, Eastvale stock dropped 7.4%. Daxon sat at the press table, adjusting his tie as cameras flashed. "I take full responsibility for the decisions that led to this breakdown in trust," he said. "We're implementing new safeguards, elevating new leadership, and doubling down on our core values." He didn't blink, didn't stammer. But somewhere behind the sharp tie and expensive suit, he knew. None of this would have happened if Mara had still been there. She never needed the cameras, never cared about the flash, but she had protected the company like it was hers. She'd seen what no one else saw, corrected errors before they spread, spotted risk patterns before damage ever began. She didn't need a podium. She'd been the reason everything had held together, and he'd let her go. No. A week later, she resurfaced. Not personally, professionally. The headline read, "Stratwell and Finch appoints Mara Elric to lead innovation strategy. With equity." The article outlined her past achievements at Eastvale. Quiet excellence, under-the-radar decisions that had saved the company millions. She was described as the mind behind Eastvale's quiet brilliance. There was a quote from the CEO of her new firm. She didn't ask for the spotlight, but she earned it. And now we're giving her the stage. A photo followed, Mara in a dark plum suit, seated at a round table, mid-smile, chin slightly lifted. She looked unbothered, unreachable, undeniable. Daxon read the article twice, then again, then turned off the screen and sat in silence. A month passed. He saw her again, this time in person, at a closed-door media innovation summit. Small crowd, only selected companies invited. She was already seated on the panel stage when he entered, confident, poised, hair pulled back in a sleek twist, speaking clearly about ethical models and sustainable growth. The audience listened, not because she was flashy, but because she spoke without trying to impress, just like always. During the break, he crossed the floor toward her. She was alone at the coffee table, stirring her tea. He stopped beside her. "You look good," he said. She didn't flinch. "I always did," she replied. "You just preferred to keep it private." The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was necessary. He tried to speak, but she shook her head. "I'm not angry anymore," she said, "but I am building something you can't undo. That's what your denial taught me." He looked at her and knew it wasn't an insult. It was a truth, a boundary, and one he didn't get to cross anymore. She walked back to the panel stage without looking back, and for the first time in a long time, Daxon didn't follow. He watched her from his seat, watched the way the room listened to her now, the way her presence commanded space without raising her voice, the way no one asked who she was beside, because now she stood alone, not in anyone's shadow. Mara didn't change her routine. She still woke at 6, still made her tea with 1 cube of sugar, still ironed her blouse and slacks until the seams looked invisible. But there was a stillness to her now that no one could touch. On her final Monday at Eastvale, no one could have guessed she was leaving. She answered emails, updated project dashboards, reviewed contract terms like she was staying another year. But behind her calm was the cleanest decision she'd ever made. She was done handing her brilliance to a man who needed it in private, but dismissed it in public. The office was unusually quiet that morning. Some were out sick, others working remote. The buzz of the gala had faded, replaced by whispers about stock volatility and possible restructuring. No one brought up the woman who had stabilized Eastvale's accounts for 4 fiscal years, the one who corrected errors quietly before they ever made it to investor meetings, the one who'd turned chaos into structure without needing applause. They didn't ask where she was going, they just assumed someone else would handle it now. Mara didn't correct them. By 10:07 a.m., her email inbox was empty. By 11:40, her desk drawers were cleared. She had one box, no labels, no photos, no nameplate. Her footsteps to the elevator were soft, measured. She wasn't in a rush. She'd already left long before this day arrived. Upstairs, Daxon sat in his office, reviewing the same memo 3 times. He hadn't slept much since the leak broke. His inner circle had started losing trust, and now legal was pressuring him to restructure 2 client contracts that once seemed untouchable. But he wasn't thinking about legal. He was thinking about her. The empty space she left behind wasn't in the reports. It was in the tempo of the building. Meetings moved slower. Corrections came later. The pulse of Eastvale, the rhythm only she had kept, was broken. He walked to the glass wall and looked out just in time to see her step into the elevator. He could have called her name, could have run, but she didn't look up, didn't even hesitate. He watched the doors close, sealing something he didn't know how to reopen. Later that day, his assistant brought in a small brown envelope. No markings, no stamps. "Found it on your desk," she said. "Probably left by Mara." He opened it. Inside was a single sheet. Printed. "Always remember, it was never about the noise. It was about what survived when the noise was gone. No signature, no bitterness, just a mirror." And it cracked something in him. The following week, investor confidence dipped again. Reports leaked that Eastvale's predictive models were unstable. The interim data team missed a major forecasting error, one Mara would have caught before it even hit the dashboard. Internal emails spiraled. Mid-level execs began hinting at options. Clients requested renegotiations. Daxon kept it all in check, at least outwardly. But the foundation was shifting, because Mara didn't take revenge. She took her value with her. Across the city, in a smaller office, with no marble or velvet chairs, Mara sat across from a new leadership board. She wore black slacks, a pale cream blouse, and a watch she'd gotten from her father before his passing. She didn't bring a resume. They didn't ask for one. The meeting lasted 20 minutes. By the end, they'd offered her equity, not a contract, not a job, a seat. "Build what you want," the CEO had said. "You don't need our permission. You just need the space." Mara nodded once. That was all she ever wanted. 3 days later, her name was printed in a press release. Small publication, no fanfare. But the headline was enough. "Quiet architect of Eastvale's core strengths takes vision elsewhere." No bitterness in the piece, no scandal, only quiet respect. The reporter referred to her as the voice behind the curtain and noted that her predictions had outperformed Eastvale's public reports 4 quarters in a row. Daxon read it in silence. He didn't deny it. Couldn't, because the numbers didn't lie, and neither did her absence. At a private conference in Midtown, 2 months later, he caught sight of her again. She wasn't on stage. She was being introduced as a new board member of Stratwell and Finch. The host simply said, "Please welcome the woman whose silence once kept a billion-dollar company from collapsing." The audience clapped. Mara stepped forward. She didn't search for him in the crowd. She didn't need to. Her presence was no longer about proximity. It was about power. He waited until the session ended. Approached her slowly by the water table. She turned when she felt him near. There was no frost in her expression, but there was distance. "Didn't think I'd see you here," he said. She raised a brow. "Then you haven't been watching the industry?" He smiled faintly. Maybe I was too busy trying to fix what you used to make effortless. She didn't smile back. I never did it to impress you, she said. I did it because it mattered. He nodded once. And I never thanked you properly. She looked at him. You didn't have to thank me, you just had to see me. And you didn't. He opened his mouth. But the words never formed. She stepped away, not in anger, in peace. She hadn't come to be seen. But now, the world was watching anyway. Mara didn't let the moment define her. She let it refine her. Her days at Stratwell and Finch didn't start with ceremony. No press junkets. No assigned assistant hovering outside a glass door. Just clean spreadsheets, meaningful conversations, and a quiet seat at the table. But what she had now, what she never had at Eastvale, was credit. Her name appeared on reports. She was quoted in meetings. She was invited to panels, not because she played the game, but because she built better rules. And when her face was printed in a mid-tier financial magazine beneath the caption, "The Strategist, you were too late to notice," she didn't frame it. She didn't post it. She folded the page neatly and put it in a drawer. Because recognition wasn't her goal. But being undeniable, that was different. Back at Eastvale, things were slipping. Investors no longer smiled on quarterly calls. CFOs shifted nervously in seats. PR firm rotations became frequent. Daxon's face was still on magazines, but now with headlines that asked questions like Eastvale stumbles, legacy fatigue, or leadership blindness. And behind every difficult meeting, there was a name that people started whispering again: Mara Elric, the one who left before the tower started leaning, the one who kept it balanced without asking for a spotlight, the one Daxon had once looked right through. He still remembered the sound of her voice, the night they met in the stairwell. She hadn't flirted. She hadn't begged for attention. She just saw the flaws in his projections, corrected them with quiet accuracy, and walked away without waiting for praise. She didn't orbit him. She didn't scheme. She just showed up, until she didn't. And now the void was deafening. She'd taken every strength he once leaned on and turned it into something unshakable. He was still on the stage, but now the audience had changed. And so had the narrative. At a private tech symposium in Connecticut, he saw her again. This time, she was the keynote. She stepped onto the stage in a grey tailored pantsuit, her hair swept into a low bun, heels steady, posture straight. She didn't read from a teleprompter. She spoke from notes she barely glanced at. Her topic: visibility, value, and the cost of silence. She didn't mention Eastvale. She didn't have to. In the audience, a junior executive whispered, "Isn't she the one from—" "Yes," someone else replied. She was behind a lot of Eastvale's early stability. She left before everything changed. Daxon sat motionless, watching her hands as she spoke. Controlled, confident, gone. After the applause, she stepped off stage and walked toward the speaker lounge. He caught up to her just before the doors closed. "Mara," he said quietly. She turned, slowly. "I don't want to take up your time," he added. "Then don't," she replied gently. He gave a small, pained smile. "I deserve that." She didn't argue. "I watched your talk," he continued. "It was more than powerful." She nodded, thanked him, and waited. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said at last, "for what I said that night, for what I didn't say the entire time before that." Mara tilted her head, her voice calm. "And what are you sorry for? The way you denied me, or the fact that I didn't stay to tolerate it?" He inhaled slowly. "I'm sorry for protecting my image more than I protected you." That gave her pause. He meant it, but it wasn't enough. "And what made you think I needed protecting?" she asked. "I needed partnership. You just weren't ready to give it." His eyes lowered. "You're right." She took a breath. "You said everything that night with your silence, so now you'll understand mine." Then she walked into the lounge and didn't look back. That night, Daxon sat alone in his penthouse, scrolling through a half-written apology email he'd drafted weeks earlier. He deleted it. Some losses weren't recoverable. Some lessons didn't come with a redemption arc. Some women don't return. Not because they're bitter, but because they've built something better. Mara's next chapter wasn't filled with revenge. It was filled with clarity. She joined 3 boards by year's end. She mentored 2 scholarship recipients. She launched a fund that helped women from non-traditional backgrounds step into decision-making roles. She didn't post about it. She let the impact speak. And it did. At the close of the fiscal year, Stratwell and Finch held their private holiday dinner. No tuxedos, no awards, just a table of leadership, their spouses, and Mara seated beside the man she now called her partner. He wasn't flashy, but he didn't flinch when she spoke, didn't turn away when cameras pointed in her direction. He held her hand under the table, not because anyone asked him to, but because it was natural, because it was public, and honest, and safe. When the waiter brought dessert, he leaned in and whispered, "Next year, I want to do this as your husband." She blinked once, then smiled, and this time, it reached her eyes. Across town, Daxon opened a holiday card someone had mistakenly sent to his office, meant for Stratwell and Finch. He almost threw it away, but curiosity slowed his hand. It read, "Congratulations on another year of remarkable leadership. The industry's changed since you stepped forward. Quiet voices speak louder now, thanks to you." At the bottom, written in blue ink, Tamara Elric, who reminded us all what value looks like when it no longer waits for permission. He folded the card, set it aside, and sat with the silence. The same silence he once filled with excuses. Now, it only held echoes. The headlines didn't come with warning. They never did. One morning, Eastvale's public relations team was celebrating a minor uptick in subscriber retention. By nightfall, every major finance blog in the country had posted the same story. Eastvale's new It Girl under investigation for breach of client confidentiality. Underneath the title sat 2 photos. One of the actress Daxon had brought to the 10-year gala, wearing a diamond necklace and a knowing smile, and another from a recent charity brunch where she'd posed beside Eastvale's nameboard, like she belonged to it. That picture aged fast. Mara didn't react when she saw it. She was on her second morning walk of the week, earbuds in, listening to a podcast about team trust and corporate integrity. She passed the newsstand without breaking pace. The scandal wasn't hers, not anymore. She was already 3 steps ahead. But Daxon wasn't. When the first internal flag was raised, he was in a media meeting, pitching expansion to a European client base. Halfway through the deck, his assistant walked in, face pale, phone shaking. "You need to see this." He excused himself. He read the message. And for the first time in months, he felt the full weight of what Mara had once buffered. He knew the actress had baggage, but she'd played her part well. She'd been polished, available, photogenic, and most importantly, willing to stand beside him when the cameras rolled. That was the trade. He had public validation. She had access. But access, he forgot, was a 2-way street. Client records were confirmed leaked. 2 former partners pulled funding within 48 hours. One board member publicly resigned, citing recent breaches of confidentiality and internal mismanagement. The words weren't sharp, but they cut deep, because they were true, and they weren't the kind of mistakes Mara ever would have allowed. The internal scramble at Eastvale was loud. Meetings ran back to back. Legal teams moved into full containment mode. Daxon was advised to stay off public channels and release a written statement through PR only. But that wasn't his style. He liked to own the room, and this time he needed to look like he still could. He scheduled a live press briefing. 2 networks picked it up. Social media streamed it in real time. He walked to the podium in a navy suit, blue tie, not a single cufflink out of place. The flashbulbs reminded him of the gala. So did the weight in his chest. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this is not the moment I expected to be standing before you. But when leadership falters, transparency must lead." He took questions, deflected carefully, owned the mistake, publicly. "I placed trust in the wrong hands, and I failed to protect the people who built this company from the ground up." He paused. Mara's face flashed in his mind. He knew exactly who he meant. Across town, Mara sat in a cafe, laptop open, muted television screen overhead showing his press conference. She didn't listen to the sound. She didn't need to. His mouth moved in practiced control. He still carried the posture of a man in command. But his shoulders were tighter now, his eyes more tired. She closed the laptop and turned away. The next day, her new firm, Stratwell and Finch, announced their latest expansion in quiet style. No gala, no glossy marketing, just a short video press release and an elegantly worded email to stakeholders. We believe in honoring talent that strengthens us from within. Leadership is not a spotlight, it's a reflection of the trust you earn. Mara Elric has joined our innovation board full-time and will lead our upcoming transparency initiative. Attached, a photograph. Mara, standing in front of a whiteboard, surrounded by colleagues, smiling, visible, named. That post outperformed every ad Eastvale ran for the rest of the quarter. Daxon read the announcement 3 times, then closed his office door, and stared out the window for a long time. He didn't feel jealous. He felt undone, because she hadn't needed to hurt him. She didn't sabotage. She didn't gloat. She didn't leak a single word. She just moved on, and proved that everything she'd once been in private was strong enough to live in public. Without him. It wasn't the scandal that crushed Eastvale. It was the echo of everything it revealed. By Thursday, 3 high-value clients demanded immediate exit clauses. A 4th issued a public statement condemning the lack of internal controls. 2 shareholder lawsuits were filed, both citing misrepresentation of executive vetting. And all of it stemmed from one mistake. Daxon let someone in who only knew how to play for cameras, not protect the foundation. Mara had warned him about this culture, not in words, but in posture, in systems. In the 1,000 quiet ways, she made sure chaos never reached daylight. Now, daylight was all he had. And chaos had cameras. Behind the scenes, PR pushed a new strategy. Rebuild trust with legacy stakeholders, one memo said. Highlight early contributors, another advised. Daxon stared at that second one. Early contributors. There was only one name he could think of, and she wasn't returning. At Stratwell and Finch, Mara reviewed a draft on ethical forecasting protocols. The team had finalized a model she helped architect, one designed to prevent the exact kind of leak Eastvale suffered. She didn't gloat. She didn't even mention Eastvale during the internal review. But her team knew, and they respected her more for staying above it. That was the difference between power that's performed and power that's earned. Daxon tried to focus on the company's internal restructuring, but everyone around him had questions he didn't want to answer. Where had the oversight gone? Why were the compliance reports doctored? Who greenlit the executive press partnerships? Every direction the blame moved in, his name appeared again. He sat at his desk late one night, scrolling through archived emails. Then he found it. An old message from Mara, dated 8 months earlier. Subject: Request for improved client encryption standards. Her body text had been short, direct, thoughtful. She'd highlighted 2 concerns, offered a clean solution, included a resource for follow-up. He never replied. Instead, he'd sent a note to his assistant that said, "Table this for now. I'll handle it with a new team." He remembered thinking, Mara worried too much. But now, he understood. She wasn't worried. She was watching the walls tilt, and he was too distracted by the wallpaper to see the cracks. He closed the laptop, sat in the dark, and finally said it out loud, "I was wrong." 2 days later, a reporter from a national outlet reached out. They were writing a follow-up to the Eastvale breach story, this time focusing on overlooked contributors and the high cost of internal silence. They wanted to interview Mara. She declined. No quotes, no statements, no comment. She'd already said everything she needed to by walking away. But her absence in the article spoke louder than any headline. She didn't need to defend herself. Her work had already done it. That line went viral. Young professionals shared it. Business analysts reposted it. Women in tech quoted it in leadership threads. Mara's name wasn't trending because she demanded to be seen. She was trending because she built something no scandal could touch. Daxon sat at his dining table alone, the article glowing on his tablet screen. He scrolled to the bottom, read it twice, then closed the page and turned the screen face down. He remembered the sound of her laugh. Quiet, not always full, but earned. He'd heard it a dozen times in private places, rooftops, cars, empty meeting rooms, but never once in public, because he never gave her that space. And now, the public had it, because someone else did. 3 weeks later, he saw her again, not in person, but on stage. A live stream played from an industry innovation summit in Seattle. Mara was seated between 2 tech CEOs and an investment partner. The host asked, "What defines leadership in 2025? She didn't hesitate. "Consistency," she said. "Private praise means nothing if you can't match it publicly. The people who help you build deserve to be seen, even when it's inconvenient. Especially then." The room went still, then applauded, not for drama, but because it was truth. Back in his office, Daxon looked around. The glass walls, the silent conference room, the branded walls that had once made him feel invincible. And for the first time in his career, they felt hollow, because the person who helped him build it wasn't here to remind him who he was before the spotlight. And now, the spotlight just made the cracks visible. Mara didn't watch the playback of the summit. She didn't need to relive it. She was already working on the next initiative, a mentorship program, targeted at internal professionals whose names never made it into the pitch decks, but without whom nothing would have been stable. She called it the Backbone Initiative, and when someone asked her why the name, she replied softly, "Because we all know what happens when you neglect it. Eventually, you fall." The first time Mara entered the Stratwell and Finch executive boardroom as a full partner, the room went quiet. Not because she demanded it, not because she wore power on her sleeve, but because the people seated around that long oak table knew something rare had entered the room. Someone who had once held up an empire without needing credit for it. And now she didn't need validation. She had equity. Her first order of business? Restructure the internal innovation team. Not with layoffs, not with big sweeping declarations. She spent the first week shadowing team leads quietly, asking questions, listening, observing dynamics that most CEOs missed because they were too busy, projecting vision to actually watch how it unfolded on the ground. She noticed where talent had been buried. She saw where silence masked burnout, and where brilliance had no microphone. By the end of that week, she presented a realignment plan that cut nothing, but elevated everything. No one resisted, because they trusted the calm in her voice more than the volume of someone else's ego. Meanwhile, Daxon was on damage control. The breach scandal had started cooling, but the aftershock lingered. Clients hesitated to renew, new contracts were slower to close, and the board, once willing to excuse his decisions, was beginning to whisper behind closed doors. He still walked the halls with authority, still wore the suit, still knew how to deliver charm on cue, but the walls had shifted, and no one told him where the cracks were anymore. Because the one person who used to warn him, she wasn't there. At a major joint investment panel in Boston, Daxon took his seat at the front row, nodding politely to peers, greeting fund managers he once mentored. The event was designed to showcase rising leadership and long-term vision in tech-based legacy firms. But the buzz wasn't about Eastvale. It was about Stratwell and Finch, and more specifically, Mara Elric. She walked on stage in a black blazer, soft silk blouse underneath, and wide-leg navy trousers. No flashy accessories, no dramatic hair, just confidence and quiet clarity. The moderator introduced her as the architect of long-term trust, the mind behind the models Eastvale used, but never named. Applause followed. Daxon didn't clap. He couldn't. He was still processing what he'd just heard. She began her talk with a single sentence. "We lose more talent to silence than we do to burnout." Then she let the room hold that for a moment. Then she added, Silence happens when credit disappears, when acknowledgement is inconvenient, and when leadership forgets that people don't just want to be paid. They want to be seen. The man seated beside Daxon turned slightly. "Didn't she used to work with you?" Daxon's throat tightened. "Yes," he said. "She's brilliant." He nodded once. She was. After the panel, Mara stepped off stage and was surrounded immediately. VC leads, journalists, start-up founders. But Daxon didn't approach her. He didn't know how. Because now, she wasn't within reach. Not socially, not professionally, not morally. She was building something out of the same values he had once disregarded. And this time, she wasn't doing it for someone else's firm. She was doing it for hers. Later that evening, a tech influencer tweeted, "If Eastvale collapses, it won't be because of scandal. It'll be because the real genius walked out the front door and made another table." The tweet racked up over 300,000 shares. Mara didn't repost it, didn't like it, didn't mention it to anyone. She was too busy preparing for her team's Monday rollout of a new client protection system, a system she'd started designing 7 months ago, before she ever left Eastvale. She'd once tried to pitch the framework there. Daxon tabled it. Now it was the backbone of Stratwell and Finch's competitive edge. And clients were lining up. Have you ever seen someone pass over your ideas, only to watch those ideas make someone else successful later? Drop your moment below. And if you know what it's like to carry the vision but be denied the credit, hit like, share, and subscribe. This one's for you. Monday morning. Stratwell and Finch was quiet, on the surface, but the energy inside their headquarters was undeniable. Clients from 3 time zones had scheduled back-to-back strategy calls. Analysts worked quietly, setting up data rooms for 2 fast-track acquisition deals. And on the top floor, in a sunlit conference room, Mara stood at the head of the table. Behind her, a screen displayed a single phrase. "Trust isn't built on loyalty, it's built on clarity." The new client protection model she developed launched at 9 a.m. sharp. By 9:46, it had already caught a breach attempt, one that would have taken Eastvale 6 weeks to detect. Her team celebrated the win modestly. There was no champagne, no group photo op, just a quiet confidence among the staff. Because they didn't just feel like employees, they felt like they were part of something built to last. At 10, the partner team met. Mara presented results cleanly, fielded questions, handed the floor to the next lead without interrupting once. It wasn't about being the loudest voice. It was about making the room smarter by having been in it. Daxon saw the news later that afternoon. A finance blog posted a short article. Former Eastvale analyst saves Stratwell client $5 million in preemptive compliance flag. There was a single photo, Mara walking alongside Stratwell's CEO, clipboard in hand, mid-discussion. She wasn't smiling. She didn't need to. She was respected. And Daxon could feel the difference from where he sat. He opened his private Slack channel, one only 2 execs and his old assistant had access to. He scrolled back 4 months. There it was. Mara's original encryption model proposal. Time-stamped. Documented. Ignored. He hadn't even responded with a full sentence. Just one word, later. Now. Later was thriving without him. He closed the window, leaned back in his chair, and let it hit him fully. He hadn't just lost Mara. He lost what she would have made of him if he had listened. Meanwhile, at Stratwell, Mara sat across from an internal legal advisor discussing partnership contracts. He handed her a draft for a new leadership equity clause. "We want to codify your decision-making power in permanent language," he said. Mara scanned it. Her brow furrowed. "There's a clause missing." "Which one?" She looked up. "The one that protects the quiet contributors, the analysts, the team leads, the managers who carry departments but never get a photo." He stared, then slowly nodded. "Add it," she said. "Without them, this place doesn't work." It wasn't about vengeance. It was about making sure no one like her had to disappear again, just to be heard. She didn't want their silence. She wanted their voice. The next day, A partner firm visited for a closed-door review. A senior executive leaned across the table and said, "You've done more in 4 months here than some do in 4 years." Mara didn't flinch. "I've always done the work," she said. "People are just watching now." There it was again. That line, that truth, that quiet revolution dressed in a blouse and slacks, never raising her voice, but shifting the air in every room she entered. At Eastvale, a recruiter sent Daxon a report. 3 key developers had left. 2 senior risk analysts submitted notice. The reason? A single line appeared in both resignations. "Looking for leadership that sees us." He didn't forward the message, didn't schedule a meeting. He just stared at the screen, then shut his laptop, and sat in the dark. The silence he once used to control others now sat with him like a reminder. At Stratwell's annual mid-year summit, Mara took the mic at closing. She didn't prep slides. She didn't rehearse. She just spoke. You don't have to steal a spotlight to be valuable. You don't have to whisper forever. But if you've been kept quiet, don't wait for someone else to name your worth. Move, build, rise, and let the people who overlooked you deal with the silence you leave behind. No applause burst, no standing ovation, just a slow, steady wave of people nodding. Not in agreement, in recognition, because Mara Elric had stopped waiting. And now the rival wasn't just rising. She was already ahead. They hadn't been in the same room in months. Not since the scandal. Not since the article. Not since the world quietly switched allegiance, without fanfare, without drama, just decision. But now, here they were. Same city, same industry roundtable, same marble-floored event center downtown. Mara stood at the media wall, fielding polite questions from a small cluster of reporters. They weren't pushing for gossip. They wanted insight, strategy, measurable wisdom. And she gave it, clean, sharp, real. Daxon entered from the opposite side, flanked by his interim PR advisor and a junior board representative. He saw her instantly, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel taller. He felt late. Mara didn't turn. She felt him behind her, but she didn't look. Not until the panel coordinator called out names. She was seated third from the right. Daxon was placed next to her. Her smile stayed steady as she walked to the stage. She greeted the moderator, nodded to the audience, took her seat. He sat beside her in silence. The air between them was thick, but not tense. It was memory. It was missed opportunity. It was the echo of every moment he'd chosen silence when he could have chosen her. The panel began. A question was asked about internal recovery after public loss. Daxon leaned forward to answer first. "Well, I've learned that cleaning up after a hit isn't just about optics. It's about returning to the people who once built the floor you're standing on." A calculated line, one he knew would reach her. Mara didn't move. When her turn came, she simply said, "Rebuilding doesn't start when you're embarrassed. It starts when you value what's been holding you up the entire time." She didn't look at him, but everyone else did. Throughout the event, the moderator peppered in questions about market, corrections, leadership responsibility, and cultural integrity. Mara answered with calm precision. Daxon answered with poise, but with something else beneath it. Fatigue, regret, reflection dressed as resolve. She could tell, but she didn't flinch. During the break, attendees mingled in the lounge. Daxon approached her slowly, not out of confidence, but caution. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the small marble table where she stood with her tea. She didn't respond right away. Then, "Sure, it's not mine." He stood across from her, silent. Then, "You look good." Her eyes stayed on her tea. "I always did," she said. "You just preferred to keep it in private." He let the words land. He didn't deflect. "I deserve that," he admitted. She glanced up. "You deserve a lot more than words." He nodded. "I came here because I knew you'd be on the panel." She didn't respond. "I'm not trying to undo anything," he added. "I know it's too late for that. But if there's anything I regret more than what I said, it's what I never gave you." She finally looked at him. "Visibility?" Yes. Credit? Yes. A seat beside you instead of behind you? He paused. Yes. Mara set her cup down. Regret looks different on you, Daxon. He exhaled. What does it look like? Quiet. He smiled faintly. Maybe I finally learned from the best. She didn't smile back. Because this wasn't a reunion. It was closure. And he knew it. As the panel resumed, the moderator asked a final question. What would you tell your past self about leadership, now that you've lived both its failure and its reward? Mara's answer was simple. Your silence will be remembered longer than your speeches. Choose carefully what you refuse to say. The audience fell quiet. Daxon looked down at his notes. She didn't need to look at him. She'd already said what mattered. The event ended. People clapped. Photos were taken. Mara left without fanfare. She didn't look back. Not at the cameras. Not at Daxon. Not at the seat she once would have waited near just to feel included. Because she didn't need to be near power anymore. She had become it. The final moments of the event moved quickly. Photos, handshakes, buzzing conversations about who would be funded next, who was pivoting, who was hiring. Mara didn't linger. She answered one last question from a Harvard business writer, signed a thank you note for the event team, and slipped into the hallway with her laptop bag slung over one shoulder. Daxon followed, not because he thought she'd speak to him again, but because some silences don't settle until you're in their presence one more time. Do you regret any of it? He asked from behind her. She didn't stop walking. I regret letting you think I was fine with it, she said calmly. He caught up to her stride. They walked side by side, the hallway quiet except for the muffled chatter behind the doors they passed. I didn't know how to balance it, he said. I thought I was protecting you. She stopped at the elevator, faced him. You were protecting yourself, she said, from being seen with someone who didn't fit your image. He looked at the ground, then up at her. You were never part of the image, Mara. You were the reason the mirror didn't crack. She blinked. But she didn't soften. Then you should have said it when people were watching. The elevator opened. She stepped in, didn't look back. That night, she got a message, not from him, from one of the junior analysts who used to work 2 desks down from her at Eastvale. Subject, you probably don't remember me. But I was the one always asking to double-check projections before finalizing anything. I used to watch the way you handled meetings. Quiet, clear, unshakable. Just wanted to say, thank you. You made space for people who didn't know how to ask for it yet. I'm at a new firm now, but your name still means something in our circle. Hope you're doing well. You deserve everything. Mara read it twice, then closed her laptop, and smiled, not because of recognition, but because something she did in silence was still speaking. Daxon, meanwhile, returned to an empty office. The floors were clean, the view still stunning, but something inside him felt stripped. He sat down and pulled out a document he hadn't looked at in months, Mara's last model proposal, her encryption framework, the one he'd dismissed with a one-word reply. He read it again. Every section, every footnote. It was airtight, forward-thinking, scalable. It could have saved them millions. It could have protected everything. But she hadn't attached ego to it. She didn't demand credit. She gave it freely, believing the right people would recognize it. And he hadn't. The next week, a magazine released its quarterly rankings of top 50 rising minds in modern tech. Mara Elric was 4th. The title beneath her name read, Proof that legacy isn't built through exposure, but through endurance. Daxon saw the cover on a coffee table in one of the VC offices he visited. No one commented, but someone had underlined her quote with a pen. Sometimes, people don't need to be louder, you just need to start listening. Later that week, Mara was on a mentorship Zoom call with 5 young women from various firms across the country. One asked her, how did you deal with being underestimated for so long? She didn't hesitate. By letting them underestimate me, and using every moment to make sure when they finally paid attention, there was no question what they were seeing. The chat box filled with hearts. Someone typed, That hit harder than any lecture we've had this year. Daxon didn't reach out again. He didn't send flowers, didn't write a letter, didn't show up at her firm's reception. He didn't deserve her proximity, but he kept the panel photo, where she sat one chair over, answering a question he barely heard, on his desk. Not to romanticize, to remember what it cost to be careless with someone whose silence was once the strongest voice in the room. Mara never thought she'd fall again. Not because she didn't believe in love, but because she knew what it cost to love someone who only loved you in the dark. And once you've been denied that kind of visibility, your standards change. She met Roman at a compliance roundtable in early spring. He wasn't flashy. No $1,000 smile or polished media tricks. He wore a grey sweater under his blazer and asked thoughtful questions instead of performing clever answers. They sat on a panel together. He quoted a line she'd written in a report 3 years ago and credited her, publicly, by name. No hesitation, no stumble. Just as Mara Elric once wrote, "Clarity without context is just a louder kind of confusion." Her eyes had flickered up. He smiled. She smiled back. It started with a meeting, then a shared project, then quiet dinners after long days, where they discussed policy, leadership, culture, and how innovation often felt more like healing than invention. He didn't try to impress her. He didn't pull strings or pretend to understand her fully, but he never minimized her voice. And that was what made her pause. They didn't rush. He never asked her why she left Eastvale. He didn't pry about Daxon, didn't reduce her worth to her past heartbreak. Instead, he made space for her to breathe. For the first time in years, Mara didn't have to make herself small so someone else could shine. Roman stood beside her and didn't dim. He only lifted. One afternoon they left a joint strategy lunch and crossed through a plaza lined with press. A reporter recognized her. "Miss Elric, quick question. Are you dating the man beside you?" Roman didn't wait. He reached for her hand, held it, and smiled without apology. "She's the reason half my team learned how to think clearer. You can write that." She didn't speak. She didn't need to. That gesture spoke louder than any denial Daxon had ever whispered behind cameras. Later that evening, they sat on a bench near the river. Roman handed her a hot tea and let the silence settle. "You okay?" he asked. Mara nodded. "That was the first time anyone's held my hand in public." He didn't react like it was a victory. He reacted like it was a responsibility. "You shouldn't have had to wait this long," he said. She looked at him. "And yet, I'm glad I did." Love, she realized, isn't about the grand gestures. It's about being seen, fully, freely, and without pre-approval. At Stratwell's summer gala, Roman attended beside her. No press lines, no drama. He stayed in the background as she gave a keynote on strategic legacy and ethical visibility. When she stepped down, he was the first person she saw. He handed her water, pressed his hand gently to her back. "You didn't even blink," he whispered. "I don't have to anymore," she said. And just like that, the woman once kept off guest lists was now the reason they even had a guest list. Mara didn't measure this relationship by milestones. She measured it by peace. Peace when he called her name without needing something. Peace when he listened without trying to fix. Peace when he stood beside her at networking events, not as a shadow, not as a handler, but as a partner who didn't mind if she shined brighter. 3 weeks after the gala, Roman invited her to speak at a joint session with one of his advisory groups. They were preparing to restructure leadership tracks across 3 companies. She hesitated, not because she wasn't qualified, but because being invited had always come with hidden conditions. "Are you sure I'm the right voice for that room?" she asked. He looked up from his notes. "You're the only one they'll remember." And when the day came, he didn't interrupt, didn't reword her input, didn't jump in to soften her points. He let her speak. And the room shifted around her, not because he allowed it, but because she no longer needed permission. After the session, they walked through a quiet street downtown. No one rushed. No eyes followed them. "I've never watched someone lead so quietly," Roman said. Mara smiled faintly. Quiet doesn't mean passive. He stopped. I know. You're the loudest person I've ever met without raising your voice. She turned toward him, half amused. Is that a compliment? He nodded. It's what I aspire to. She wasn't used to that, being admired out loud. She tucked her hand into the crook of his arm. Then keep walking beside me, she said. Not in front, not behind. He tightened his grip gently. I'm already here. Later that night, she found an old photo from her early Eastvale days. She was in the background, blurred, while two execs posed beside a banner. Her name hadn't even been listed in the event credits. She studied it for a moment, then closed the file, because that version of her didn't exist anymore. In late August, they took a short trip to the coast. No press, no panels, just 2 days in a house with windows that faced the ocean. Roman cooked breakfast. Mara read in the mornings. They sat side by side in silence that didn't require filling. And on the last night, as they walked along the shore barefoot, he stopped mid-step. She turned. He reached into his jacket and held out a small silver ring, not extravagant, not loud, simple, steady, like everything else he'd been since day one. If I ever make you feel invisible, he said, promise you'll tell me. She blinked, emotion catching her off guard. I don't think I could disappear, even if I tried, she whispered. He held her hand. Not with pressure, with certainty. I want a life where you're always seen, fully, clearly. In every room we walk into. That's the only kind of marriage I believe in. Tears pooled, but she didn't cry. She nodded. I accept. He kissed her softly. Not because they were alone, but because for once, nothing needed hiding. Fall arrived quietly. No major headlines, no scandals, no sudden shifts. But across the industry, something was happening, and everyone could feel it. Mara's name now carried weight, not as the former Eastvale strategist, but as a force in her own right. The brand she had built, measured, intentional and respected, was becoming a standard. And this time, she wasn't the hidden mind behind the movement. She was the name people led with. Stratwell and Finch was preparing for its end-of-year advisory summit. It was the first time Mara would deliver the opening address, not because she'd asked for it, because the partners insisted. The internal memo had said, no one understands the value of ethical legacy like Mara. This year, we begin with the one who made us recalibrate how we build. She didn't write a dramatic speech. She wrote a framework. And when she stepped on stage in a deep brown suit and minimalist heels, she didn't lead with power. She led with purpose. Invisibility is often romanticized, she began. We're taught that the strongest builders are the ones who don't need credit. But that narrative doesn't serve the builder. It serves the structure that forgets them. A pause. A subtle shift in the room. She continued. We are no longer hiding behind brilliance. We are naming it, elevating it, and designing cultures where contribution is seen before loss forces recognition. The audience stayed silent, not from boredom, from impact. Later, during the executive lunch, a guest from a leading venture firm leaned toward the Stratwell CEO and whispered, you better hold on to her. She's not going to stay small for long. The CEO didn't respond. He didn't need to. They all knew. Mara wasn't stepping into bigger rooms. She was building them. Meanwhile, Daxon prepared for his final board presentation of the year. The losses had slowed. The scandals had cooled. But something had fractured deep inside Eastvale, something harder to measure. The board didn't challenge his numbers. They challenged his tone, his leadership, his clarity, and beneath the surface, he could feel it. The absence of the one person who used to steady the room before it even asked questions. After the meeting, he walked past his old war room, the small glass-enclosed space where Mara used to work late hours running models, correcting forecasts, adjusting for risk variables no one else caught. He stood there for a while, alone. No one noticed. No one joined him. He walked away quietly, because he understood now what it meant to be left behind, not by scandal, by evolution. The next morning, Stratwell's social media team posted a short clip from Mara's address. Her voice clear, her posture grounded. You don't have to shout to be heard. but you do have to stop letting silence cost you your name. The clip gained 1.2 million views in 48 hours. Not because it was viral, because it was true. And truth? People were hungry for it. The recognition didn't come with trophies. It came with invitations, not to galas, but to roundtables, to decision rooms, to blueprint discussions shaping the next era of ethical leadership. Mara turned most of them down, not out of arrogance, but because not every room deserved her presence anymore. She no longer felt the need to prove herself. Her work already had. One of her proudest moments that fall wasn't in front of a camera. It wasn't even listed on her LinkedIn. It happened in a small break room, mid-afternoon, over paper cups of coffee. A young compliance manager from the Midwest office approached her during a strategy retreat. "You probably don't remember," the woman said, "but 4 years ago you left notes in the margin of a forecast I built. You could have ripped it apart. Instead, you built on it." Mara smiled gently. "You were close. You just needed context." "I've kept those notes," the woman whispered. "Still use the system you suggested." Moments like that didn't trend, but they lasted. At the final Stratwell and Finch board meeting of the year, Mara was asked to deliver the closing reflection. She didn't prepare a speech. She walked in with a note card. One sentence. "The people who hold things together rarely raise their voices, but they should never be ignored again." There were no gasps, no applause, just agreement, because by now, everyone in that room had felt the sting of losing someone like her. And they weren't going to let it happen again. Later that week, she visited her old neighborhood. The small corner cafe was still standing. Same scratched tables, same humming fridge, same quiet comfort. She sat by the window with a worn notebook. No meetings, no pressure, just peace. Roman joined her an hour later. No security, no handlers. Just a man with a hand on her back and a laugh that reached his eyes. "You good?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from her. She nodded. "I think I am." Back in Midtown, Daxon stood outside a media event. He wasn't on the invite list this time. He was a guest, someone attending, not headlining. He looked through the glass wall as a new panel began. He recognized faces, younger leaders, fresh voices. One of them quoted Mara before the panel ended. She said, "You can't scale silence. Eventually, it cracks everything you've built." Applause. He stood there, hands in pockets, not angry, not bitter, just aware of what power looks like when it's earned. The airport was unusually quiet for a Tuesday. Mara held her boarding pass in one hand and her baby's bottle in the other, swaying gently as she stood near gate 23. Her daughter, Sage, was asleep in the carrier strapped across her chest, soft cheeks against Mara's chest, one fist curled near her jaw. Roman returned from the cafe with 2 teas and a paper bag of lemon scones. "They only had these left," he said. Mara smiled, accepting the tea. "Then today's a lemon scone day." He leaned in, kissed her temple. "Everything packed?" She nodded, checked in, on time. No drama. They moved to the corner seats near the window, the ones with a clear view of the runway. It felt surreal, not because of the travel, but because of how quiet it felt to move forward, with no weight trailing behind. 30 feet away, Daxon Varel stepped into the same terminal, sunglasses in hand, suit jacket folded over one arm. He was on standby for a private investor meeting in Boston, his original flight delayed. His assistant had rerouted him through this terminal. He didn't know she'd be here, not until he caught the sound of her voice. Soft, low, steady. He knew that cadence anywhere. He turned and saw her. She didn't notice him at first. She was focused on Sage, adjusting the small hat on her head, smiling gently when the baby murmured in her sleep. Roman reached over, brushing Mara's knuckles with his thumb. They looked like peace, not success, not headlines. Just 2 people who had chosen to walk in light and let the past stay in shadow. Daxon didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't interrupt. He sat down across the terminal, behind a pillar, out of their line of sight, and watched. She laughed once, quietly, at something Roman whispered. That sound? He hadn't heard it when she worked for him, not like that. He used to think he was giving her everything by protecting their privacy. Now he saw it for what it was, containment. Mara wasn't a secret. She was a whole chapter he never had the courage to read out loud. The boarding announcement echoed. Roman stood, gathering their things. Mara adjusted the carrier gently, pressing her hand to Sage's back. As she turned toward the gate, she glanced over her shoulder briefly. Just once, her eyes swept the terminal, paused, landed, on him. Their eyes met. No drama, no tension. Just a moment. He gave the smallest nod. She returned it, barely visible, then turned and walked forward, not as someone who had been lost, but as someone who had finally been seen. Daxon stayed seated long after her flight was called. He didn't board his own, didn't check his phone, didn't move when the next gate announcement rattled overhead, because for the first time in a long time, he was sitting with the full weight of what he'd lost. And it wasn't just Mara. It was the version of himself he might have been if he'd chosen courage over control. She hadn't glared, hadn't rushed past. She simply saw him and walked forward anyway. That was the part he couldn't stop replaying. She had no bitterness left to offer him. And no room for apology either. Because peace doesn't make space for the people who only learned your value once they lost it. Mara settled into her window seat with Sage still sleeping against her. Roman fastened her belt for her, checked their bags again, and handed her a piece of gum like always. "You good?" he asked softly. She turned toward him, rested her hand on his wrist. "I'm good." Then, quietly, he saw us. Roman didn't ask who. He didn't have to. He just nodded once. "Does it change anything?" She looked down at Sage, then out the window. No. And she meant it. As the plane taxied, Mara watched the tarmac stretch out in front of her like a blank page. No old emails, no unspoken words, no late-night compromises, just forward, and with her daughter sleeping against her heart and the man she loved. Beside her, there was nothing behind her worth turning back to. Daxon eventually boarded the last flight of the night. He sat by the window, alone. No calls, no press, no one to ask what he was thinking. And even if they did, he wouldn't have known how to answer. He wasn't angry, wasn't hopeful. He was learning something quieter, how it feels to watch someone rise without you, and know they're better for it. At 36,000 feet, Mara closed her eyes briefly. She wasn't escaping anything. She was arriving, not to a destination, but to a life where she was no longer waiting to be named, claimed, or included. She belonged to herself now, and to a future built not on silence, but on choice. The winter gala came without warning. No major press, no sponsorship banners, just a simple invitation printed on thick ivory cardstock with silver trim. Inside, one line, honoring those who shaped us quietly. Mara wasn't sure she'd attend. She didn't need closure anymore. She had love. She had legacy. But something about the phrasing lingered. It wasn't about power. It was about acknowledgement. The kind that doesn't beg for attention, but still deserves to be heard. Roman was already dressed when she came down the stairs. Black suit, no tie. A calm presence, as always. "You don't have to go," he reminded her, gently. "I know," she said. She slipped on her coat, held her head high. "I'm not going to be seen. I'm going because I was always part of the story." Whether they admitted it or not, the ballroom wasn't as grand as the Lucent years ago. But this time, Mara didn't walk through a side door. She wasn't a backup, wasn't a replacement. She was on the guest list, first name, no +1 required. Roman walked in beside her anyway. They moved through the space without tension. No one whispered. No one looked surprised, because by now, everyone knew who she was. At the front of the room, Daxon stood in a tailored dark grey suit. He spotted her immediately. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. He just watched. As the woman he once refused to name walked in wearing a name that now carried rooms, Halfway through the evening, a program was handed out. Simple black print. On page 4, a line stood out. Special thanks to Mara Elric for the systems you built, the calm you brought, and the silence we misread. Roman looked over at her. Her hand tightened around the paper. That's the closest thing to an apology I'm getting, isn't it? She murmured. Roman smiled softly. Does it feel like enough? She looked around, at the heads turning gently toward her, not with surprise, but respect. Then back at the man beside her. It does now. Later, Daxon crossed the floor, alone, not to reclaim, not to explain, just to speak. Congratulations, he said quietly. She turned toward him, poised, calm. Not sure what for, she replied. He swallowed. For being the one they still remember. Her eyes didn't soften, but they didn't sharpen either. I wasn't trying to be remembered, Daxon. I was just trying to be seen. He nodded once. And I see it now. The music swelled behind them. Roman appeared gently at her side. Mara turned to leave. Before she did, she said one last thing. Quiet but clear. You were never the ending. You were the middle that taught me how to write my own. Then she walked away. Mara didn't look back. Not at the stage. Not at the lights. Not at Daxon. Some goodbyes don't need words. They just need distance. Outside, the air was crisp. Snow drifted softly through the street lamps. Roman opened the car door, helping her in. Neither of them said much on the drive home. There was no need. Because closure doesn't always come with confrontation. Sometimes it comes with clarity. Back at their place, Sage was already asleep. Mara changed out of her gown slowly, hanging it with care, then sat by the crib for a moment, just watching. Roman leaned against the doorway. She'll never have to earn visibility the way you did, he said quietly. Mara looked over her shoulder, smiled. No, she'll grow up knowing she belongs in every room she walks into. He crossed the floor, knelt beside her. And if she ever forgets, he said, she'll have a mother who reminds her. The next morning, the headlines didn't mention Mara. No flashy press, no clickbait. But on one quiet business leadership blog, buried halfway down the page, was a note titled, The Quiet Shift. It read, We didn't notice her when she walked through the back door years ago. We barely credited her when the numbers stabilized, but she didn't wait for the room to catch up. She left and built her own. Now, everyone watches when she speaks, because she no longer whispers. She redefined power without ever needing a podium. At the bottom, Mara Elric, leadership partner, mother, architect, seen. Across the city, Daxon read it alone at his desk. No press team, no investor call. Just a man who once had the world and lost something bigger than wealth. He didn't curse her name. He whispered it once, then leaned back and understood. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can become is the version of yourself no one saw coming. The one that doesn't need revenge, the one that doesn't need applause, the one who walks away fully whole. Because no amount of wealth buys back the dignity of someone you denied. Have you ever been praised in secret but denied in public? Have you ever been kept in the shadows, told to wait your turn, told it was protection, told it was love? And one day, you realized you weren't invisible. You were being hidden. If this story made you feel seen, even just a little, share it. Comment below with the moment you chose yourself, and subscribe for more stories where quiet strength becomes the loudest legacy. Because sometimes the most unforgettable revenge is becoming undeniable.